So yeah, thank you all for coming today. Amazing turnout, and I just would also like to say, RIEL done such a professional job putting this together, and yeah, super impressed. I too would like to pay my respects to the Larrakia people and traditional owners, past, present, and emerging. So today I'm going to talk to you about the Yulbara Foundation Churchill Fellowship to address the challenges facing remote Aboriginal communities in the culture of native rock oysters. And hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll agree with me that the world is your oyster when oysters are your world. And also, yeah, just acknowledging RIEL and Sydney there. And I should introduce myself. I do know like a lot of people in the room, but I'm Samantha Nowland. I'm a Senior Research Scientist at the Darwin Aquaculture Centre, which is part of Northern Territory Fisheries. Hopefully. Yep. So just to set the scene a little bit, talk a little bit about global rock oyster production. So in 2021, this was 6.7 million tonnes globally of oysters produced, which is 5.3% of all aquaculture products, and valued at around about 11.6 billion Australian dollars. This is dominated by temperate species, so tropical species, which are in the region in red here, only make up about 1% of total production. So tropical oysters are considered to be an underutilised aquaculture resource, but they're attractive aquaculture candidates because they have rapid growth rates. Our waters in the tropics are quite warm, which means a lot of animals in our oceans grow quite quickly. They can require relatively simple technology and small financial input. No feed costs, so oysters are a no-feed species. They're eating the microalgae that's naturally abundant in our oceans. And there's already established processing and marketing channels, either through a wild harvest fishery or through selling temperate cold water species throughout the world. In the Northern Territory, oyster farming was initiated by traditional owners with partnership with the government. So traditional owners, they wanted to reintroduce commercial sales experience in the past by developing an aquaculture industry. So in the mission days, there was some wild collection of oysters and selling wild oysters. Oyster aquaculture, it aligns with people's aspirations of working on country and utilising their own natural resources. And the photo here is at Yugbani Aboriginal Corporation Farm on South Melbourne Island. So what's the opportunity? The species is called the blacklit rock oyster, and I think you can see by that photo why it has the name. So this species has been historically harvested by Aboriginal communities for food and trade for millennia. There's local knowledge of the species, which is super important for us and for aquaculture and science, because it means firstly, you know where to look to collect brood stock, so your parent stock, but also where oysters grow naturally. Probably no surprise that a farm would probably go really well there too. They're super large, so in parts of Coburg, they grow up to a dinner plate size. And then with further research has shown that they have fast growth rates, which means that they're competitive with established temperate oyster species. They're found across the Northern Territory and actually across all of Northern Australia. So this is a good opportunity. It means that many people can benefit from the opportunity of this species. Most importantly, they do taste amazing. So blacklit rock oyster aquaculture, in summary, incorporates local knowledge, historical connection, cultural appropriateness, and low-tech farming methods. So the research development and extension program, it's a two-way knowledge production and decision-making. It's between time-tested Aboriginal knowledge and scientific inquiry. We started in 2014, so we're going on to a decade now, and we basically have a series of areas that we're focusing on and have focused on. So hatchery production. Pretty early on in the research, it was shown that wild collecting spat was not going to be able to service a commercial size industry. They just don't recruit in those numbers. So a lot of effort has been put into closing the life cycle of the species in the hatchery. Grow out methods that are suitable for the Northern Territory. We have pretty extreme conditions up here and big tides and things that like to live in our waters. So methods that would be suitable for us. Shellfish quality assurance. So Australia has a shellfish quality assurance program, but it was tailored for Southern Australia, which is a very different environment and much more highly populated than our Northern Territory coastline. Business development support, so working with different groups about how best business would work for them and in their community setting. Species identification, and Brett would be happy that I mentioned biosecurity as well. We've done a lot of work looking at natural populations and understanding baselines for biosecurity purposes. Over this time, we've had major support provided to us by the Cooperative Research Centre Northern Australia, FID's Fisheries Research and Development Corporation, and of course Northern Territory Government. And then just a few photos there. The top one is Warnell telling Paul where to put one of the early stage oyster farms out of Goulburn. And Layla and Elroy working on some data collection of growth and survival. So in 2019, I was awarded a Gilba Foundation Churchill Fellowship to travel to America, Canada and New Zealand to look at the current challenges facing remote Aboriginal communities working towards farming blacklet rock oysters. I had 4 key aims that I was investigating. How remote Aboriginal communities can own and operate successful oyster farming businesses, farming oysters in extreme environments with a focus on innovative farming technologies, how to ensure food safety and marketability of oysters, and insights into developing hatchery production methods for oyster species. Due to COVID, probably hear this a lot, it was delayed. In that time, I also had a child, so he got to come on the Churchill Fellowship with me in the end as a toddler. So that's one of the tilapia farm we were visiting. So I eventually did get to go and took off in June 2023. Bit of a snapshot. So I started in Australia. I flew to America and then drove a car up from America, Portland to Vancouver Island in Canada, and flew from Canada across to New Zealand, landed in Auckland, and then kind of flew down, ending up in Queenstown, back to Darwin. So I travelled for 6 weeks to 3 countries on 2 continents to meet experts and innovators. I visited 11 farms, 4 First Nation owned, had 3 additional conversations with First Nations oyster farming communities, visited 8 hatcheries, 2 of those are First Nations owned, 4 shellfish processing plants, 1 of those was First Nations owned, 4 seafood markets and oyster bars, and 6 meetings with aquaculture associations. And it's all written up in a final report. So it should be available any day now. If you do want to read it, then want more information about anything, then yeah, just follow that link. So hopefully I've captured an understanding of the local context and like the place-based opportunities and challenges, and hopefully distilled some of the more relevant insights, learnings and perspectives for our industry. The report is in 3 parts. The first part is Indigenous-led aquaculture. The second is oyster aquaculture, which is more of the hatchery technical focus. And then the third part is recommendations and conclusions. So today I'm going to go through part 1 and 3, and if you're interested in part 2, that will be another take. So Indigenous-led aquaculture. This is a photo here of one of the farms I visited. You might be able to see some baskets laying on the beach there. That was in America. So I'll talk about First Nations farms visited. So I'll go through a few of those, some business and governance models that I observed, First Nations partnerships, and then some advice from First Nations oyster farmers, and then also from their perspective, some challenges and concerns, and then a couple of best practice support programs that I was lucky enough to have a chat with. So I could spend probably a whole hour talking about each one of these companies and how they're set up and about them, but I'm going to try and, it's quite text heavy, but distill something that might be interesting for you, and if you want to talk more later, that's fine. So I'll read the report. So Salish Seafoods is in Washington, USA. They've got Island Enterprises, their logo is in the middle here. So they're an economic development corporation, which is owned by the Squaxin Island tribe. So basically they their island enterprises looks to establish economic ventures, which is to enable the dream of self-sufficiency and self-governance. So they own and run for the tribe 2 gas stations, cannabis retail and farming, and shellfish aquaculture. So I was lucky enough to join the Tribal Council and Island Enterprises board members while they were visiting Squaxin Island beaches during the geoduck harvest, which is the photo here. So the board came out on a few boats, and then we're looking at this geoduck harvest. So geoduck is a type of shellfish which is quite high value. It takes 10 years to grow out, but yeah, it's harvested at low tide when it gets to 10 years old. And yeah, it was quite exciting to see a harvest in action. So they own 41 acres of tidelands on Squaxin Island, so it's uninhabited tribal reservation. They farm Pacific oysters, manila clams, geoducks, and they also do restocking of Olympia oyster, which is a native oyster species. So they don't sell that, but they purchase seed in and then restock natural populations. They also own a processing facility, and they sell into the USA and overseas markets. So Rod runs the show. Most of the workforce is Hispanic. The USA has really good immigrant workforce arrangement, and First Nations are mainly involved in the manila clam harvest. So they'll harvest wild manila clams from their areas and then sell them to Salish Seafoods, who then do the processing and marketing and distribution of that product. Fifth Shellfish Corporation, so jumping over to British Columbia and Canada now. So they're owned by the Sook First Nation. Their logo there. They also have an Economic Development Corporation. So it's they've designated an outside consultant to act as the band administrator on the Economic Development Corporation and business developments. And that's bringing in outside expertise on someone who's like specifically knowledgeable and has a lot of business connections and know-how and a good track record. So the band's brought him in to run the business developments. They own a gas station, which has a Tim Hortons, which is apparently a big deal. And they also own the oyster farm. Profits from the oyster farm go back to the First Nations Council, who are currently building a community complex located on the reserve that has a health precinct, a hall, a kitchen, and First Nation government offices. The past oyster farm they had was a lantern net operation. So that was basically farming oysters in a bunch of kind of lantern style nets that sit in the water column. Super labour intensive type of way to farm, so it was not profitable and that closed down. And then in 2020 they reopened using this flip farm system. So you can see the top photo, the baskets are flipping there by the boat. It's kind of what it looks like. This is a New Zealand technology, I guess, and probably one of the newer technologies in oyster farming, and it's really changed the way that oyster farming looks. It really reduces the labour requirements of oyster farming and the lifting and the manual work. So it allowed them to reduce, one, their workforce needs, but also to pay their employees a much higher wage. So now being an oyster farm technician is actually one of the highest paid jobs in the community. 50% of their employees are First Nation. So currently they had 2.6 million Pacific oysters in the water, and they're aiming to expand to make $3 million profit a year. So their goal here is to become self-sufficient and self-sustaining, so equal goal in profit and First Nations employment. Paja shellfish, also in British Columbia on the other side of Vancouver Island. They're owned by the Slam First Nation, who also have an Economic Development Corporation. They own a number of businesses, including a hotel and a gas dock for boats. They've held an oyster farm license for 45 years, and they've been in and out of the business across this time. That building up there in the back on the bank near the oyster farm is 35 years old and was used as a hatchery at one stage and oyster processing facility at another, and it's got currently storing gear in it at the moment. 2019, Paja Shellfish was established. So it's a partnership model. Grace Adams, pictured in the photo here, she's the First Nation oyster lease manager, and then they're in partnership with the non-First Nations father and son team who manage and run the farm. They also own a flupsy. One of the reasons why they closed down in the past was that they couldn't rely on wild spat collection anymore. It's quite a popular area for tourists, and a lot of boats were using an anti-fouling paint that actually stopped the spat settling in the area. So they couldn't get any supply of seed, but they partnered with the hatchery now, and they have a flupsy, which is a floating nursery system, which is what Grace is standing on there. So they grow their really small spat out to a bigger size before putting it into their farm, their floating baskets. So the partners are paid a wage, but they're also paid a percent of the yearly profits. And they focus on slowly building the business. So their goal here is a profitable and sustainable business. And then jumping across to New Zealand, Moana New Zealand is a massive company, so I can't really talk too much about them without talking about the Maori Fisheries Settlement in 1992. So this provided funds to Maori to buy a 50% stake in Sealord Products Limited, which was a major fisheries quota owner, so based essentially 50% of all quota. They also provide Maori with 20% of any new commercial fishing quota. So any new quota that's been established, then 20% of that goes to Maori. They undertake the appointment of Maori on statutory fisheries bodies and agreed to make regulations to allow self-management of Maori fishing for communal and subsistence and cultural purposes. So in return, in the settlement, Maori agreed that all Maori commercial fishing rights and interests were settled. They would accept regulation for customary fishing and cease litigation, and also endorse the quota management system. I'm going to mispronounce this, but Kaya Moana, the Maori Fisheries Trust, was created. So that's guided by 58 mandated iwi organisations who represent all Maori in New Zealand. So Moana is the largest Maori-owned fisheries company in New Zealand. So the Maori Fisheries Trust are the controlling shareholders, so they represent all Maori, all the 58 iwi organisations. The 58 iwi organisations are shareholders, but the percentage of their shares depend on the length of their coastline and the number of community members. So the longer the coastline that the iwi organisation has, the higher percentage of shares in the company. Moana is a huge business. It has wild catch and aquaculture, but in abalone, finfish, lobsters and oysters. Their oyster businesses represent 60% of the New Zealand oyster industry, so quite significant. And they have a 100-year business plan, I think really long term. So on that note, a lot of their current oyster farming is based on wild spat collection, but they see that as an unsustainable future for the industry, and recently invested $5 million into building their own hatchery, which is part of an oyster transformation project worth $20 million. And they're happy, the business plan is happy for the hatchery side of it to run at a loss for a given number of years, because they know that their thinking is more longer term and that it will be the profitable way to go in the future. They're fully vertically integrated from hatchery to packaging and marketing. Dividends are paid to the shareholder organisations, so there's iwi organisations, but Moana profits can never be used for personal gain, so they're typically invested into social developments and housing. They have a preferential employment scheme. However, they look for the right people in the right job and employ many non-iwi people. And that's the photo of their nursery shed there. And they've got this quite innovative pond grow-out system where if you come to talk part 2, I can talk more about the technical aspects of that. So some of the business models that I observed was this economic development corporation model. So bear with me as I explain it. So the First Nations leadership, council and chief sit here. That could be hereditary or elected chief or both. And then they run all the government and council operations. So education, health, social, natural resources, finance, human resources. And then they set up an economic development corporation, which has a chair who's directly responsible to reporting back to the council. The EDC typically has a board, and then under that board, makes decisions on the businesses, so oyster farming and other investments, casinos, travel, fisheries, fuel stations, etc. So it's the main model used in Canada and the US, and it means that EDCs are independently governed and managed from the First Nations Council, which provides stability for businesses but also for joint venture partnerships. The model was described as proactive and successful, so businesses that sit under the council, as one of the council members explained, can experience delays. Also, this takes the burden of running businesses off of First Nations leaderships, which are a lot of time volunteer positions, but it means that the First Nations leaderships are ultimately responsible for holding the EDC accountable. So then the shareholder model, this is employed by Nowland in New Zealand, but basically shareholders could be various community groups or private enterprises as well, who then appoint a board. The board then appoints a series of directors who then make decisions on the day-to-day business operations and investments, so oyster aquaculture or other businesses. So yeah, shareholders can be various. This model is likely more suitable for businesses that occur across a large geographical area or involve many different community groups or multiple farming species or investments. And then really importantly, First Nation partnerships were quite a big theme. So 4 that I visited while I was travelling was the Paja Shellfish, which was the Slum First Nation and private father and son team I spoke about. Mariculture Limited, so that's between Nova Harvest, who run a hatchery and nursery operation, and then the Hoyet First Nations, who run Grow Out. That's Mariculture Limited partnership. Sleuth Aquaculture is the tilapia farm, so they have a Sumas First Nations and Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance partnership with that tilapia farm, and then Golden Eagle Sablefish, which is also a fish hatchery and grow out, and the KCFN First Nation and the Arla Group are in partnership there. So some of the drivers or the reasons why First Nations groups may want to engage in partnerships is that it provides a social return on investments, creates jobs, capacity building, so gaining experience and knowledge in specific farming, and of course profit. So joint ventures are a good way to start out in aquaculture. Specifically, they bring in relevant expertise but they also need to be established for the benefit of all. So the advice was that they work well with partners that are collaborative, good stewards, and employ local people where possible. And the things to avoid is a misalignment between expectations and goals, and having only one main knowledgeable employee or farm manager. So I got given a lot of advice from First Nations oyster farmers along the trip, and things that are italics quotes. So just wanted to kind of point out a few of the advice that I was given here, and then of course this is the Sook First Nation flip farm. So really, pretty much everyone gave the advice to be super clear about your aims and goals at the start of your business. So, and do you prioritise, for example, First Nations employment or profit? Because those two things sometimes don't always go together as top priorities. Longer term view compared to the typical Western approach. So I guess that's more advice to people wanting to partner with First Nations groups, but just to realise that you might be doing things at different timescales. Payouts aren't positive, so wiser to reinvest the profits or use them for the benefit of the whole community. It's a very strong message. Don't underestimate the importance of trust-based relationships. So a lot really going back to open communication and building trust and that's within communities as well as in partnership type models. Successful businesses have good management continuity. One of the, few pieces of advice is don't waste time if someone has no intentions of working. So one of the quotes from First Nations leadership is, "I won't open the door, you can open yourself." A lot of advice back to the government that they need to rebuild trust. So it takes time to understand Indigenous perspectives and genuinely take part, and to make sure that it's not tokenism. And then also for other First Nations groups to recognise and understand the business value of your own local knowledge and your own natural resources. And there's some challenges and concerns. So I guess these photos here, this is a oyster predator, a moon snail, and its eggs. And Vicky Kruger was picking up as many as she could while on the tidal flats at their oyster leaves in Spoxton Island. So on top of all the natural predators and weather events and conditions and challenges that aquaculture faces, these are a few additional things that the communities had to say about additional challenges and concerns. So for aquaculture, there's a barrier to entry-level engagement. Aquaculture requires training and it's a specialised skill, it's skilled labour. There are many grant programs, but there are barriers to accessing this funding. So to be successful at grant applications, you usually require high literacy and numeracy and really good communication, really good connections and networks. So that can be a barrier, especially if you live remotely. Some funding application processes are not worth the return on effort to put in the funding applications. There's issues in succession planning, so youth not being interested in manual labour jobs, which is where Souk kind of ran into that issue as well, and then got around that with changing their farming style with the flip farm. Remoteness and market access, access to labour. So the quote here is, everyone who wants to work already has 2 jobs. Local politics can slow things down, so the approach needs to be slow and steady. Systemic barriers of socio-economic disadvantage. And then one really strong advice is that if groups become highly territorial, they can hold each other back. So the metaphor is like crabs in a bucket, when one tries to get out, the other is pulled back down. So some support programs and two of the really standout ones that I was able to chat to. So more text heavy, but bear with me. But the Aboriginal Aquaculture Association, so both of these are based in Canada. So this is an NGO. It was established by First Nations leaders to facilitate meaningful participation of Aboriginal communities in Canada's aquaculture sector. So they're a voice and representation for First Nations rights and concerns. They employ consultants as technical experts to provide advice when groups or bands, First Nations groups, make a request. So if they're interested in a specific type of aquaculture, they'll get a technical expert to provide free advice to that group. They also facilitate information sharing workshops and opportunities so that First Nations groups can make informed choices about what they will or won't invest in, which they also describe as being a really great way to break down barriers between people with the commercial expertise and people with the natural resources and interest. They facilitated an international study tour, so they took a number of chiefs over to Norway at one stage, and out of that came some really long-term established relationships with salmon industry, and the salmon industry on Vancouver Island is going really well and actually has a stronger social license than the oyster industry, go figure. But they also basically said the salmon industry was more keen or open to partnering with First Nations groups than oysters historically. Critical funding from the government, though, has recently been cut, restricting the capacity of the AAA. Senior Fisheries, so they deliver the government's, they're a private company that deliver the government's the Pacific Integrated Commercial Fisheries Initiative, which is called the PICFI program. The PICFI program is a commercial program for fisheries and aquaculture developments. They only fund capital investments, they don't fund operational or research. They have a business development team, which is what they describe as their kind of their gold and their special formula. So this business development team, they are technical experts that support applications. So they provide advisory services to assist with applying, but they also support project implementation. So when we're at a Souk Nation, the PICFI funded a floating barge, a grading, and they were there when the barge was being brought out and anchored and everything as well. So they really saw it through to completion. The BDT does not play a role in the evaluation of an applicant, has no decision-making authority. And then the services of the BDT are free to the communities. a First Nation or a suitable representative of the nation has to be an applicant. Part 2, which will look at oyster aquaculture and the more technical side. So I looked at hatchery technologies, different nursery systems that might be suitable for our industry, different grow out. So that's the flip farm in New Zealand there in the background. Shellfish quality assurance, processing and marketing. So I'll be presenting this at Darwin Aquaculture Centre in early April. So if you are interested in the more technical side of oyster aquaculture, then just shoot me an email. I'll make sure I let you know. But back to the top end. So the Northern Territory's vision, I guess, the industry's vision, is to supply markets with a premium native oyster which has been sustainably grown by Territorians in the pristine waters of the Northern Territory. And I just wanted to summarise my post-Churchill aspirations. So coming out of this, I think it's important to continually improve tropical oyster aquaculture so that it's attractive, meaningful, and it's an exciting industry with a sustainable future. As born on Galamindo, we've played a black-lip rock oyster without it yet, Barney. Some takeaways, Indigenous, so I guess more broadly thinking, this sector globally of Indigenous aquaculture development, it's quite a refreshing, positive atmosphere and group to be part of. People are really positive about the social impacts of aquaculture for people and communities. But there's also this nice balanced view of environmental sustainability, profitability and socially appropriate businesses. So it's less of the highly commercial competitive aquaculture image that you might have in your mind. The global demand for oyster protein is higher than current production. Everywhere I went, no one could produce enough oysters to meet demand, which is great for blacklip, so there's room in the market for us. This international network of farmers, research and experts, they're really keen to share ideas and their own learnings to solve issues that are relevant to the Northern Territory. So it's quite an open, friendly group to be part of, and that's great for the future of our industry. And it's my hope that individuals, organisations involved in the development of the black-lip rock oyster industry, they will consider this information and they take away what's important to them. Everyone has a unique situation, so take away what's important to them and then test possible solutions and learnings in their own environment. Applying for your Churchill Fellowship, I highly encourage you to do so. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so you can travel for 4 to 8 weeks and learn about a topic or issue that you're passionate about. You don't need any formal qualifications, there's no age limit. Bring your family along with you, they are very supportive of that. And you can do it on any topic, provided there's benefit to Australia and your community by sharing the knowledge and skills. So the next application round opens in March. So if you're interested, want some advice or assistance, let me know, I'm happy to help. And you can take your kid with you, it's a lot harder. If you do something like this, where you've got your hands full at the airport and you're trying to connect Wi-Fi from one phone to the phone with your contacts on, travelling with a lot more luggage than you would normally travel with. But special thank you to the women in my life who made this trip possible. So my mum, and then my mother-in-law and my nana-in-law, they came along to oyster farms and even ate raw oysters when they don't like raw oysters. So special thank you to them. Lastly, thank you for all of our black-lip rock oyster industry development partners. None of this would be possible without you, and you've really stuck in with the long game of what it takes to create a new industry. Thank you. Any questions?
That was great, Sam. Thank you. I was when you showed the structures, the cutting structures, what I was missing there that's obviously really important in that context was where the cultural governance sits. I know very well with the Māori where it sits in that board, which is a board of trustees. But the other part that I'm really interested in is what that structure looks or could look like here in Northern Territory, because in my discussions, I've only seen people interested in wealth creation. I've only, when Larrakia Nation get up and they talk about wealth creation for individuals, I don't see that I'm sure it exists, but I don't know about that sort of a structure here in the Australian context, or at least the Northern Territory context.
Yeah, I guess that this is kind of providing examples of how it's been done and used successfully in other countries for people to come up with their own ideas or inspiration about how it might work. The Economic Development Corporation model has a lot of benefits, even though it can also work in small communities where there aren't a lot of people might sit across both boards. They might be on the EDC, but also they might be on the council, elected council or hereditary. So that could work really well. It just separates it out business development wise, and then also usually people on the EDC board are paid positions, whereas there's a lot expected of volunteer positions on councils, and that's similar.
But is there an equivalent, is there a structure of any kind here for doing that kind of business?
Not in the aquaculture sector that I'm aware
No,
of, but I imagine there are other business structures about how. So Alpha for Unland Progress Association, for example, who they run the shops. So on behalf of the Northern Territory, they would have probably like quite an interesting governance structure. Yeah, we're probably more of the shareholder model or some kind of a hybrid type model there. Share?
I noticed the parallels with North America and Canada were so striking, the social situation and that sort of thing. Do you reckon, you've obviously had the opportunity to see, and that's wonderful, and do you reckon it'd be possible to get some of our key players in the Indigenous industry here to be able to get over there and have a look and really feel what it looks like? Because it looks so powerful.
Yeah, it would be great if someone would fund that. Put the call out. Yeah, and they would probably be very interested as well about that. I guess the other takeaway too is that everyone has challenges too. Like this is a glossy overview, and there's more detail in the report. And I tried to be quite real about those as well. But then people do tell you things that are in confidence. So I wouldn't say that. I think there's a lot of learnings in that in Canada, especially in aquaculture, they've been doing it for a lot longer in North America. But so there are a lot of learnings there, but I think we're doing pretty well in the global scheme of things as well.
It's good to go and look over the fence when you feel like you're doing a shit job and you find out you're actually doing a really good job.
Yeah. So I think Tash and then
thank you so much, Sam, for that overview. What a fabulous opportunity to compare and contrast what's happening here in the Territory and some of the similar contexts overseas. I just wanted to talk about the social enterprise aspect of the places that we live in and the businesses you visited, because here in the Northern Territory, particularly in the coastal fishing space, such as what's happening out in places like Maningrida, the social enterprise aspect of the fishing business is almost more important than the profit making side of the business. And I was wondering if that came through in some of the places that you visited. And the second point was, it seems like there has been some, NGOs or more support available to some of the Indigenous organisations overseas than what we have here through the NGO, and whether you saw that as a potential opportunity for government and other stakeholders to develop some more support here for Indigenous communities.
Yeah, I guess to answer your second question first, it was really impressive. The reconciliation efforts in New Zealand and Canada were striking and quite impressive. But that also does depend on where they are, where they're at with their treaty rights. So I don't go into that. I go into it more in the report, but in Canada, different community groups are at different stages with treaty rights, and whether they're putting more investment in social enterprise is important, but I guess I've more focused on some of the other, which profit is super important, because to be independent, they need to be able to fund their own governments, which also in some areas include their own police force as well. So like they need to make profits and be independent financially. So definitely making profit was really high up there, and I guess you could see the cost of investments with casinos and gravel and fuel stations. Did I answer your question fully?
The sort of like support, NGO
Yeah.
businesses. We've got, the Aboriginal Sea Company that's been established. We've got Northern Territory Seafood Council, which represents some players in the industry. Do you see that there's a need for some other kind of, and then you've obviously got the NT government support systems. Do you see a need for some other kind of structure that can support Indigenous agriculture development in the north?
Yeah, I think we can always do it better, and I think the NT suffers from a lack of resources and personnel and boots on the ground to deliver these things. So, like, my advice would be to really invest in the things that are doing well and do really bolster those up and focus on the winners.
Did you know that Zoom has oyster emojis?
Alex,
I just put two.
Alex, you're not on mute.
I just put oyster emojis.
Sound like Darwin Aquaculture
Hell yeah.
Bob?
Something that
I think it's really insightful of you to have thought of this initiative and taken it, because it's a bleak situation, and I mean, perhaps this could act as a case study on wider opportunities. Our business is interested in it. We're looking potential to collaborate, not initially driven by support, yeah, because I think it's important. But we also take up your point about ultimately there has to be profit for things to grow and sustain, and ultimately it may be that the runners will take over more aspects, but having support in the early stages make it much more easy to achieve success and take that patient long-term view, because it won't be a cakewalk, but it's a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. It wasn't my idea at all. So the industry came from what traditional owners were interested in, and I was lucky enough to be employed to work on this. There's a lot of partners and a lot of people, especially at this point in time. We're coming to quite a nice point in time with the industry development, but there's a lot of people working on it. And yeah, I just was getting a lot, like, selfishly, get a lot out of it, and travelled around and ate a lot of oysters too. So
That's okay.
but thank you, Morris.
Yeah, so have you got some figure ideas, like going ahead, what you would see as the big things to make it sustainable and ongoing?
In the technical aspect, there's some like really clear takeaways that we can kind of apply or try in that Northern Australian context with, like, I guess that part 2 hatchery and grower side. With the business development, it's more, I guess, about providing the examples to communities about, like, what there is out there and what other people are doing, and the connections and network if they do want to find out more about different groups and different business structures, then they can. But it's up to the communities how it sits within their community and their business structures. And yeah, so I guess that side of it's really just about opening connections with international groups, which are super open to sharing information. And one of the advisors on the AAA was, like, really happy to connect with Zoom call back to us. So I guess there's 2 sides of the coin there, which is why it was a bit split up. But yeah, there's definitely learnings to be applied. But I think the broader takeaways really around network and what can be applied. Yeah.
I would have a question without being an expert, but how complementary would be, like, the knowledge of Mediterranean countries to your work?
You can spend your lifetime traveling the world and gaining knowledge that way. So yeah, there's definitely for sure other countries that are doing great things and examples to be learned from. I focused on Canada, America, and US, Canada, America, and New Zealand, because they had such a long history of oyster farming and oyster aquaculture, and also had some really strong examples of First Nations leadership and ownership of farming. So I guess that's where I focused on. But even when I got there, you meet one person and they have 3 more people that you must talk to, and you could spend your months and months just connecting.
Is it? Sorry, this will be second question from that. Has anyone in government, Northern Territory government, looked at how this actually scales? And I ask because I hear what you're saying, but in my local area in New Zealand, there's a company called Whakatoria Mussels, just a few years old. They've had millions of dollars in support. They've got their aquaculture settlement space. They're producing mussels. They've got great commercial leaders, non-EV as well as EV, but they're having trouble with margin. They're having trouble with getting labor. They've got this big, beautiful processing plant. I think it's 40% capacity. So they do take an intergenerational view. You call it 100-year view, but I'd say intergenerational. It's not just the next quarter or even the next 3 years, but they are in trouble. And so I wonder, because one can't just say, oh, you go and network and then, it'll be fine because it's a great product and you can sell one for this much money. In reality, they're entering, like the mussel people, they're entering a big market, as you said, of oysters, and there's only so much you can do with niche when you're scaling. So I just wonder, is someone looking at that, the commercial implications of scaling this kind of business outside of these guys, so I'm sure are having a good look at it. I mean, in government.
That comes back to the individual business planning and making sure you're doing your business planning. And I would just point out processing. It's just not that profitable in New Zealand. All the big processors. It's better to have few processors. Depending on what you're doing in New Zealand, it's a major. Not many people actually eat oysters. So the seafood there, the aquaculture that's produced is. The farmers get the least price for their product nationally, but you pay the most in the restaurants to eat oysters in New Zealand. So all of their product is basically exported. They've done a beautiful job creating an export industry that supports aquaculture there. But yeah, I guess I wouldn't invest in processing. It seems to be where most difficulties are had for scaling wise, but really it comes down to what the individual community's goals are and that profitability versus local employment. A big theme in Northern Australia and the groups we work with is a push for local employment, and that's one of their main drivers and goals, whereas it probably wasn't as big a theme in some places that I visited overseas. So I guess it's really being clear on the goals and stuff. And then, it depends on how you set it up, whether you have a private partnership model, or whether communities want to then sell into one processor. Oysters are pretty good where you can process them as much or as little as you like, really.
Is there collaboration between the different entities? You said there's a number of different entities. Have they got a collaborative process or mechanism?
In the Northern Territory?
No, I really meant in Canada.
Yes and no, depending on the basically geographic location and also where they get their hatchery seed from. If they get wild spat or hatchery, like a lot of the hatchery groups are connected and they value add by cutting transport costs and things like that.
All right, we still have time, but maybe from the online participants, any question? Just jump in, please. Doesn't look like. Any more questions? We have 2 minutes more. That's good. All right, so thanks a lot, Samantha. And so we start for the RIEL seminar, and you guys are welcome to join us in the RIEL morning tea, which is in the yellow building too. So just go out and follow the others. You should get there. If you are happy to send any feedback for us about our infrastructure, our session in general, maybe the microphones didn't work that well, who knows? So please just drop a message in the email. And yeah, it would be nice to see you again anytime soon. Every second week we are here. So thanks a lot. Thanks.
And what's that?